In my opinion, I would always rather display the vault over the grave for the family to have their graveside. But on some days, in some conditions, it's simply not safe or not possible. Now, hillsides are something that we're used to working with, but unfortunately, on a service like today, it's not safe for the pallbearers to make their way to the graveside, and it's not safe for the family to make their way next to the grave to be present at the graveside for the service. As you can tell, one end of the grave is around 3 feet lower, so that tells you just how steep the pitch is on this section of the cemetery. Now, for this cemetery and this funeral home, we've worked together over the years to devise the best way possible to give the family the closest thing to a graveside committal service as possible. And by doing so, we set what's called a false setup. It's also called a mock setup. This setup basically allows the graveside service to be held in the cemetery, but away from the grave if the grave is unsafe, or if it's unsafe for the pallbearers, like today's case. In most circumstances, it's due to the safety of the grave itself, with walls caving in after the grave fills up with water, or if it's a sandy cemetery and the walls aren't stable enough to support the weight of the burial vault. The first thing I do when I arrive to a cemetery like today is begin by displaying the vault next to where we will have the graveside setup. And for this service, the family has chosen a grave liner. Now at our company, we use 2 different styles of grave liners, one with a flat top lid and one with a dome top lid like you see here. Now technically speaking, this is not a burial vault, this is a grave liner. It is non-sealed and has holes in the bottom to let water in and out. The sole purpose for a burial container such as this is grave maintenance, to make sure that as the casket deteriorates, that the ground doesn't settle over the years in a manner in which requires the cemetery to constantly backfill and reseed the plot. It also prevents the ground from collapsing as heavy machinery and the mowers drive over the grave to be able to do other services and maintain the grounds. With this being a Wilbert Monarch, you'll see in other videos that I've produced where this vault can be painted on the interior and exterior, and a nameplate and an emblem can be chosen as well. But some funeral homes and some cemeteries prefer that we use a grave liner that's a Wilbert Monarch rather than our flat top boxes, mostly for the aesthetics because the flat top boxes do not look quite as clean as a Wilbert Monarch. Now, since I knew I'd be doing a false setup today, I brought the corner caps that are used to place the lowering device over the vault. Without these corner supports that attach to the sides of the base, the lowering device would not be able to sit over the vault or over the grave liner, meaning the casket would have to be roped in by hand, which could be more problematic than using the lowering device. But with the Imperial lowering device we use, the pistols don't have room to ease the casket down into the vault, so we remove the pistols and use detachable rollers to make sure that the casket doesn't enter the grave liner or the vault as the casket glides across the lowering device. And typically I'm not a fan of using the detachable rollers because when the casket is placed, there are times where if the casket isn't lifted high enough, it may displace those rollers and prematurely enter the bottom of the vault, which, as you can imagine, is a disaster. One end of the casket would fall down into the burial vault or the liner, and the other end would still be on the roller, and that would be extremely traumatic to see as a family. With this being a false setup, the pallbearers are able to straddle both sides of the grave liner, which means for the most part the casket can be straddled around the grave liner and set down on the rollers, rather than having to rely on the rollers to support the weight of the casket. But now that the grave liner is prepared for the service, we can go ahead and set our committal service tent to block the wind for the family. Now, typically in the wintertime when it's cold, I don't do what's referred to as an offset, where the burial vault or the liner is outside of the tent. But because of the fact that we are doing a false setup, if the family wants to watch the grave liner lid be placed and the grave liner placed into the grave, I don't want the tent in the way of my equipment to use my buggy to make that process happen. It would take a lot longer to tear this tent down and then get started on the interment process, so I'd rather set it offset. That way, even if the family doesn't stick around to watch the interment, it doesn't take as long for the funeral directors, who are required to stay until the vault is interred. My main goal with setting this committal service is to block the wind, but unfortunately that does block the view of the grave. So if the family decides to watch the interment process, they'll simply have to walk around the tent and watch from the hilltop. As I'm setting this committal service, it's only around 25 to 30 degrees and a little bit breezy, but the weather is calling for almost a 40-degree high today, which means that the frozen ground will begin to thaw in the sunlight, and it will turn this cemetery into a slip and slide. When the weather turns nice but the ground is still frozen, the top half-inch of soil will thaw and turn to straight mud, which you will see later in the video, which is one of the reasons why we chose to do a false setup. Even though I was perfectly capable of placing this vault over the grave and setting it the Wilbert way, with the base suspended and the lid pushed back, it would not be safe for the family to walk the solid wood casket down the hillside to where my device sits. So this setup is strictly for safety precautions. But as with any other setup and any other committal service I do, the family is more than welcome to stay to watch the interment process after the committal service concludes. And I will say one thing, I don't get too nervous anymore about services. The emotions of the job can still get to me, but I have no doubts in my work. But on days like today, I do feel a little bit of the pressure of making sure that things go correctly. There are 3 different vault companies that are used to coming to this cemetery, including my own, and this section is well known for being extremely difficult to manage, especially when it's raining or on days like today where the ground is frozen but it's beginning to thaw. And what can happen in a situation like this is equipment failure can result in a catastrophic disaster on this section. Our number one priority when it comes to placing the vault or the grave liner into the grave is traction with our buggy. If the buggy loses traction and begins to slide, we not only run the risk of damaging headstones on the way down the hill, but we also run the risk of having their loved one who has already been placed inside the vault or the grave liner going down that hillside as well. On a day like today, slow and steady is the way to go. And I did take every precaution as I could, that you'll see here in just a minute, to make sure that if I did lose traction, I had safety measures in place to make sure the buggy could be slowed down and stopped before hurting any headstones or go barreling down the hill. And this section is one of the reasons why my company works for funeral homes in this area, because of disasters like I've just explained happening with other vault companies. Now, I've done 6 or 8 services in this section, and none of them have been easy, but none of them have been extremely difficult. I was pretty lucky today because even with all this mud and the thawing, I was able to come straight down from the top of the hill to the high end of the grave. Now, when there's a large headstone in the way, going across the hillside with the weight of the vault already on the buggy can be extremely dangerous, especially if traction is lost and the buggy may roll. So I was pretty lucky in this instance to be able to come straight down from the top of the hill to the platform that I'm setting up now. And just like with any committal service setup, our first step is to set a stable platform to make sure it can display the weight of the burial vault. Now, even though I'm not swinging and setting this vault the Wilbert way, the platform still has to be 100% level because I may need to set the burial vault or the grave liner down onto this platform to readjust it before I place it into the grave. And this was my first line of defense if I lost traction with the buggy. I took an aluminum board and a wood board and drove some 4-foot stakes around 3 feet into the ground, creating a little bit of a backstop just in case the buggy started rolling. Now, on top of that, I made sure to use some plywood over this area where the ground was roughed up from the digging process, and that ground is going to really thaw out just like it did right here in front of the committal service, and you can really see just how muddy this situation got. And now that it's warming up, it's became really slick. So with my plywood out and the e-brake on standby on my buggy, I gently creaked my way down the hillside as slow as possible to get to my platform to where I can set the grave liner down into the grave. And at this point, the casket has already been placed into the vault. So extreme caution must be used. And this is another reason why I swear by the Johnny Handler from True Rebel Equipment, because of its hydraulic lifting points. Now, I could just extend my boom out and begin to put the vault into the grave, but what I want to do is place down my outriggers, which will be much more stable than having wet tires on plywood. This Johnny handler also has a winch system to allow me to slowly let the vault or the grave liner out over the platform with a winch rather than having to use manual labor, which can result in the vault sliding too fast down the boom, or putting myself in a position where I could be in a pinch point where if the vault began to swing or sway towards one side, or if the buggy was collapsing in the ground around the grave, I may put myself in a position where I could get pinched or hurt in between the vault and the buggy. And that's one thing I try to avoid, is putting myself in a situation where I could get hurt. I've got a wife and kids at home, and the last thing I want to do is get myself hurt on the job, or worse, because that has happened in the past with vault men. Men have lost their lives doing this job. So it's my priority to make sure that everything is safe for not only myself, but for the family's loved one who's been placed into this vault, and for the family in attendance to the graveside as well. But now that my support beams are out and everything is ready to go, I can slowly lower this grave liner into the grave. And since I set everything up correctly in the first place, I didn't have to set the grave liner down on other boards and readjust it before placing it into the grave. It's at this point where I asked the cemetery crew where they would like the grave liner to be placed in the grave itself, because there is room enough to slide the grave liner from side to side or from end to end, which may make burying the person who goes in the plot adjacent easier in the future, and to make sure that there is plenty of room in between plots and in between vaults for the vaults that will be interred at a later date. So yes, this service was a little bit nerve-wracking, but it's our responsibility as a vault company to do everything we can to give the closest thing to a committal service as possible when the conditions are too dangerous for the family to be graveside. If it were dry and in the middle of the summer, I would have advocated for the funeral home to allow me to suspend the vault over the grave, but for today, I truly believe that this is the best service I could have provided for this family in this situation. No one fell, no one was hurt, and the committal service took place just yards away from where their loved one was laid to rest. Take care, and God bless.